The moment that shattered my reality wasn't walking into a hotel room, wasn't finding suspicious text messages, wasn't discovering credit card charges for jewelry I never received. It was opening an envelope that arrived with no return address on a Tuesday afternoon in March, pulling out a professional family portrait that showed my husband of 8 years, standing behind a woman I had never seen before, his hands resting protectively on her shoulders, while 2 small children, a boy who looked exactly like him, and a girl with his distinctive green eyes, smiled up at the camera with the comfortable familiarity of a family that took their togetherness for granted. They were posed in front of a Christmas tree in what was clearly their home, wearing matching red sweaters that someone had carefully coordinated, looking like the perfect family unit that I had believed I was part of until that moment. The photo was dated just 3 months ago. Taken during the weekend, my husband told me he was attending a work conference in Dallas, when he came home with stories about boring presentations and terrible hotel food, while these strangers wore his smile and shared his DNA. In that instant, holding evidence of a life I knew nothing about, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband, and my own existence was based on lies so elaborate and sustained that discovering them felt like waking up from a coma to find that years had passed and the world had completely changed. The envelope had been addressed to me specifically, in careful handwriting I didn't recognize, with my married name spelled out in full. Someone had wanted me to see this photo, had gone to the trouble of tracking down my address, and making sure this devastating revelation reached me directly. There was no note, no explanation, no signature. Just this professionally taken family portrait that raised 1,000 questions while providing only one terrible answer. The man I had married was living a completely separate life, with people who clearly believed they were his only family. The children in the photo were too old to be recent developments, too comfortable in their poses to be casual acquaintances, too much like their father to be anything other than his biological offspring. This wasn't evidence of an affair or a moment of weakness. This was documentation of a parallel existence, proof that while I was creating what I thought was our shared life, he was simultaneously creating an identical life with other people who had no idea I existed. I sat in my kitchen, staring at this impossible photograph, trying to reconcile the man in the image with the husband who had kissed me goodbye that morning, who had asked about my day and reminded me to pick up his dry cleaning, who had seemed completely normal and present and committed to our routine. The cognitive dissonance was so severe it made me physically nauseated. How could the same person be in 2 places, be 2 people, maintain 2 completely separate family identities, without either family knowing about the other? The logistics alone seemed impossible. Yet here was photographic proof that the impossible had been happening under my nose for years. How many Christmas mornings had he spent with them while I waited at home, believing his explanations about early morning work calls or emergency business meetings? How many family traditions had he shared with strangers while declining to create similar memories with me? For 8 years, I had built my identity around being David's wife, around the partnership we had created, around the shared dreams and goals that gave my life structure and meaning. We had met in graduate school, 2 ambitious people who recognized in each other the kind of focus and determination that could build something lasting and significant. Our courtship was intentional and mature. Our engagement was celebrated by families who saw us as perfectly matched. Our wedding was the culmination of careful planning and genuine excitement about the future we would create together. Those early married years felt like the reward for making good choices, for choosing compatibility over passion, stability over excitement, partnership over romance. We were the couple our friends envied, the marriage other people pointed to as evidence that love based on mutual respect and shared values could flourish in ways that purely emotional connections couldn't sustain. Our life together had followed the script we had written during those planning conversations in graduate school: professional advancement, financial stability, a carefully maintained home that reflected our good taste and shared aesthetic. David's career in consulting required extensive travel, but we had discussed this before marriage and agreed that the financial benefits and professional opportunities justified the temporary inconvenience of his frequent absences. I had my own demanding career in marketing, my own social circles and professional commitments, my own sources of fulfillment that didn't depend entirely on his presence or attention. We were modern partners who supported each other's ambitions while maintaining individual identities, who trusted each other completely because we had built our relationship on honest communication and mutual respect. Or so I had believed, until this photograph forced me to confront the possibility that everything I thought I knew about our partnership was based on information that was incomplete at best, deliberately falsified at worst. The travel schedule that had seemed reasonable during our early conversations now appeared in a completely different light when viewed through the lens of this family portrait. 3 days a week out of town, every week, for 8 years. Weekend conferences that required his absence during times when most couples would be together. Emergency business trips that arose with suspicious frequency during holidays and special occasions. Late-night flights that prevented him from attending family events or social gatherings that mattered to me. I had been understanding about these professional demands because I believed they were building our shared future, sacrificing immediate togetherness for long-term security and success. But this photograph suggested a different interpretation, that his travel schedule was perfectly designed to maintain 2 separate family lives, that his professional demands were actually personal commitments to people I had never heard of, that every business trip was potentially a family visit to this other life he had constructed in parallel to ours. The children in the photograph were what made denial impossible. Affairs could be explained away as temporary lapses in judgment, as emotional needs that weren't being met at home, as mistakes that could be forgiven and overcome with counseling and commitment to change. But children were evidence of intention, of planning, of a sustained relationship that required not just emotional investment, but practical commitment over years. The boy appeared to be around 6 years old, which meant he had been conceived during the early years of our marriage, when I believed David and I were still in our honeymoon phase, still deeply connected and committed to building our life together. The girl looked to be about 4, born during what I remembered as one of our happiest periods, when David was particularly attentive and affectionate, when he had been talking about our own plans for starting a family in the near future. These children weren't accidents or mistakes. They were evidence that while I was living one version of our story, he was simultaneously living a completely different version with people who believed they were the protagonists of his life. The woman in the photograph was beautiful in a way that made me understand, with painful clarity, why someone might risk everything to be with her. She had the kind of natural elegance that made expensive clothes look casual, the kind of warm smile that suggested she was genuinely happy, rather than just posing for a camera, the kind of comfortable intimacy with David that spoke of years of shared experiences and inside jokes and daily routines. She wasn't positioned like someone who was trying to steal someone else's husband. She was positioned like someone who believed she was that husband's only wife, someone who had every right to his presence and attention and commitment. The way David's hands rested on her shoulders wasn't possessive or secretive. It was protective and proud, the gesture of a man who was claiming his family publicly, who wanted the world to see his connection to these people. This wasn't documentation of an affair. It was evidence of a marriage, complete with the kind of domesticity and tradition and shared commitment that I had believed existed only between David and me. The professional quality of the photograph suggested this wasn't a casual snapshot or a spur-of-the-moment family moment captured on someone's phone. This was a formal family portrait, the kind taken by professional photographers during scheduled sessions, the kind that required planning and coordination, and the kind of investment that families make when they want to document their togetherness for posterity. Someone had made appointments, chosen outfits, arranged schedules, and paid for a professional photographer to capture this moment, all while I remained completely unaware that this family existed. The formality of the portrait suggested that this other family had traditions and rituals and shared experiences that were important enough to document, that David's commitment to them was substantial enough to justify the time and expense of professional photography. How many such portraits existed? How many family milestones had been professionally documented while I lived in ignorance of their significance? I found myself studying every detail of the photograph with the intensity of a forensic investigator, looking for clues about when and where it had been taken, about the nature of the relationships it documented, about the life it revealed that had been hidden from me so completely. The Christmas tree in the background was elaborate and beautifully decorated, suggesting this was taken in a home where holiday traditions were important and carefully maintained. The children's clothes were expensive and well-fitted, indicating that this family had access to resources and prioritized their appearance and comfort. The woman's jewelry was subtle, but clearly valuable. The kind of pieces that are given by someone who knows your taste intimately and has the means to indulge it. Everything about the image spoke of stability, prosperity, and genuine affection, the same qualities I had believed characterized my own marriage, apparently existing in parallel in a relationship I had known nothing about. The return address on the envelope was missing, but the postmark showed it had been mailed locally, from the same city where David and I lived, where I had believed we were building our life together. Someone who knew about both families had decided to expose the secret, had taken the risk of mailing this explosive evidence to the wife who had been kept in the dark about her husband's double life. Who had sent this photograph, and why now? Was it the woman in the picture, who had perhaps discovered David's other marriage and wanted to force a confrontation? Was it someone who knew both families and couldn't stand to watch the deception continue? Was it David himself, creating a crisis that would force him to choose between his two lives rather than continue the exhausting performance of maintaining both? The anonymous nature of the revelation was almost as disturbing as the revelation itself. Someone had information about my life that I didn't have. Someone was making decisions about my future without giving me the chance to participate in those decisions. Before I tell you how I responded to this life-altering discovery, I need to ask you something that has haunted me since that Tuesday afternoon in March. Have you ever received information that made you question not just your relationship, but your entire understanding of reality, your ability to trust your own perceptions, your confidence that you really knew the person you had chosen to build a life with? Have you ever been forced to confront the possibility that while you were living what you believed was an authentic partnership, someone else was treating that partnership as one of multiple options, as part of a portfolio of relationships you knew nothing about? If you've ever felt like you were living in a carefully constructed illusion, if you've ever wondered whether the person you loved most was someone you actually knew at all, subscribe to this channel now. Because what I discovered after receiving that photograph isn't just about bigamy or infidelity. It's about how people can live completely separate lives while sharing the same bed. How deception can become so sophisticated that it creates parallel realities. How the most devastating betrayals are often the ones that force you to question everything you thought you knew about love, commitment, and truth. The investigation that followed this anonymous revelation changed not just my marriage, but my understanding of how well you can really know another person, even when you've chosen to share your most intimate life with them. The first step in my investigation was the most difficult, accepting that I needed to investigate at all, that the photograph wasn't some elaborate hoax or mistake, that the evidence of my husband's other family was real and required a response. Part of me wanted to believe that there was an innocent explanation, that the woman and children were relatives I had somehow never been told about, that the photograph had been taken during some family obligation David had felt unable to discuss with me. But the intimacy captured in the image, the professional quality of the portrait, the way David's face showed genuine happiness and comfort, made innocent explanations impossible to sustain. This wasn't documentation of an obligation or a favor. This was evidence of a life he had chosen to live, a family he had chosen to create, a commitment he had made to people who clearly believed they were the center of his world. I began by examining every detail of the photograph under a magnifying glass, looking for clues about where it might have been taken, when it might have been captured, what it might reveal about the duration and nature of the relationships it documented. The background showed a living room that was furnished with expensive but tasteful pieces, decorated with family photos and children's artwork, clearly the home of people who had lived there long enough to create the kind of comfortable domesticity that takes time to develop. The Christmas tree was positioned near a large window that showed what appeared to be a suburban neighborhood, the kind of tree that families spend hours decorating together, that represents shared traditions and annual rituals. Everything about the setting suggested permanence, stability, and the kind of domestic routine that requires sustained commitment over years rather than months. The children's comfort level in the photograph was what made the reality of David's double life undeniable. The boy was leaning against his father with the casual confidence of a child who took that access for granted, who expected to be welcomed and supported and cherished. The girl was looking at the camera with the kind of unself-conscious joy that children show when they feel completely secure in their family relationships, when they have no reason to doubt that they are loved and wanted and protected. These weren't children who had been introduced to David recently or casually. These were children who had grown up with him as a central figure in their daily lives, who had learned to count on his presence and attention and affection as a given rather than a gift. The tragedy wasn't just that David had created this family while married to me. It was that these innocent children believed they had a father who was completely committed to them, who had no competing loyalties or secret obligations that might threaten their security. The woman's expression in the photograph was what broke my heart most completely. She wasn't posing like someone who was uncertain about her place in David's life, or insecure about his commitment to their relationship. She was smiling with the confidence of a woman who believed she was completely loved, who trusted that the man behind her was as committed to their family as she was, who had no reason to doubt that their partnership was built on honesty and mutual devotion. The ring on her finger was clearly a wedding band, matching the one I had seen David wear throughout our marriage, identical to the one I wore as a symbol of our exclusive commitment to each other. How was it possible for him to wear wedding rings to two different women simultaneously, to make vows of fidelity and exclusivity to multiple people, to participate in marriage ceremonies with different families while maintaining the fiction of singular commitment to each? The logistics of maintaining two complete families began to reveal themselves as I studied our shared calendar and compared it to the evidence in the photograph. The weekend the picture was taken corresponded to a business conference David claimed to attend in Dallas, a professional obligation that had kept him away from home for 4 days. But the Christmas tree and decorations in the background suggested this photo was taken in someone's home during a family celebration, not during a business trip to another city. Either David had lied about the conference entirely, or he had used the conference's cover to spend the holiday weekend with his other family, returning home with stories about professional networking and industry presentations, while actually participating in the kind of intimate family traditions I had believed he shared only with me. How many other business trips had been family visits? How many professional obligations had been personal commitments to people whose existence I had never suspected? I spent hours cross-referencing David's travel schedule with the children's apparent ages, trying to understand the timeline of deception and the extent of his double life. If the boy was approximately 6 years old, that meant David had been maintaining relationships with both families since the early years of our marriage, when I had believed we were still deeply connected and committed to each other exclusively. The girl's age suggested that David had been simultaneously participating in the intimate process of creating and raising children with another woman, while discussing our own plans for starting a family, while making love to me with apparent passion and commitment, while building what I believed was a shared future based on honesty and mutual devotion. The casual cruelty of this parallel existence was breathtaking. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage vows. He had been actively creating the kind of family life with someone else that he had been promising to create with me in some vague future that apparently never included actual commitment or follow-through. The investigation took on a life of its own, as I discovered how much information was available to someone who knew what questions to ask and where to look for answers. Public records revealed property ownership, marriage licenses, birth certificates, a paper trail of David's other life that had been hiding in plain sight, invisible only to the wife who had never thought to look for evidence of her husband's other commitments. The woman's name was Catherine, and she had been married to David for 7 years. 1 year after our own marriage, which meant he had committed bigamy with the kind of casual confidence that suggested either sociopathic disregard for law and morality or experience with deception that predated our relationship. Their marriage certificate was filed in the same county courthouse where David and I had been married, signed by the same justice of the peace who had officiated our ceremony, identical in every legal detail except for the names of the participants. The birth certificates for the children revealed even more devastating details about the extent of David's deception and the depth of his commitment to his other family. Both children bore his last name, were listed as his biological offspring, had been given names that suggested careful consideration, and shared decision-making between parents who took their roles seriously. He hadn't just been visiting this other family occasionally, or maintaining a casual relationship with Catherine. He had been actively participating in the process of creating and raising children, had been present for births and first steps and birthday parties and all the milestones that define family life. The children's medical records showed David listed as their father and emergency contact. Their school enrollment forms showed him as a resident of Catherine's address. Their extracurricular activities included him as someone authorized to pick them up and make decisions about their participation. This wasn't a secret affair. It was a complete alternate existence, as fully realized and legally documented as the life he shared with me. My sister Jennifer had always been suspicious of David's travel schedule, and had occasionally made comments about how convenient it was that his business trips seemed to coincide with holidays and special occasions. When I finally showed her the photograph and explained what I had discovered about David's double life, her response was immediate and practical. "We need to hire a private investigator and document everything before you confront him, because someone who can lie this systematically for this long will be prepared for this moment in ways you can't imagine." Jennifer's professional background in family law had given her insight into how these situations typically unfolded, how the perpetrators of such elaborate deceptions often had contingency plans and strategies for damage control that assumed eventual discovery. She helped me understand that I wasn't just dealing with infidelity or even bigamy. I was dealing with someone who had constructed a life so complex and legally vulnerable that he would be motivated to protect himself through any means necessary, including attempting to discredit or intimidate the wife who threatened to expose his criminal behavior. The private investigator Jennifer recommended was a woman named Maria Santos, who specialized in cases involving marital deception and had experience documenting the kind of evidence that would be legally admissible in both criminal and civil proceedings. Maria's initial assessment of my situation was sobering. You're not dealing with someone who made a mistake or had a moment of weakness. You're dealing with someone who has been successfully maintaining two complete identities for years, which requires a level of planning and sophistication that suggests this isn't his first time engaging in systematic deception. She explained that bigamy cases often revealed patterns of behavior that extended beyond the immediate crime, that people capable of maintaining such elaborate lies frequently had other secrets that would emerge during investigation. Maria's approach was methodical and comprehensive, designed not just to confirm what I already suspected, but to uncover the full scope of David's deceptive activities, and to document everything in ways that would provide me with maximum legal protection and leverage. The surveillance that Maria arranged revealed the extent of David's commitment to his other family in ways that were both fascinating and heartbreaking. He wasn't just visiting Catherine and the children occasionally, or maintaining a casual relationship with them. He was living as a fully engaged father and husband, participating in school events and family outings, coaching the boys' soccer team, and attending the girls' dance recitals. The photographs Maria's team captured showed David in completely natural interactions with his other family, displaying the kind of comfort and intimacy that develop only through consistent presence and shared daily experiences. He was shopping for groceries with Catherine, helping the children with homework, attending parent-teacher conferences and family barbecues with the relaxed familiarity of someone who belonged completely in that domestic environment. What struck me most about the surveillance footage was how genuinely happy David appeared when he was with his other family, how relaxed and present he seemed in ways that I rarely witnessed during our time together. With Catherine and the children, he laughed more freely, engaged more fully in conversations, showed the kind of spontaneous affection that had become increasingly rare in our marriage. The contrast was devastating, but also illuminating. Apparently, David was capable of the kind of emotional availability and family engagement I had been hoping for in our relationship. But he had been reserving those qualities for his other life, presenting me with a more restrained and distant version of himself, while saving his genuine warmth and attention for people I had known nothing about. The realization that I had been living with a deliberate performance rather than David's authentic personality was almost more painful than the discovery of his bigamy. The financial investigation that accompanied the surveillance revealed the economic infrastructure that had made David's double life possible, and the extent to which he had been systematically depriving our household to fund his other family's lifestyle. Separate bank accounts, credit cards, and investment portfolios had been maintaining Catherine's household, while I believed our family finances were stretched thin by his business expenses and professional obligations. The mortgage on Catherine's house was being paid from accounts I had never heard of. The children's private school tuition and extracurricular activities were being funded through financial instruments that existed parallel to our shared financial planning. David hadn't just been emotionally and physically unfaithful. He had been financially unfaithful, diverting resources that I believed were being used for our shared future toward maintaining a lifestyle for his other family that was more comfortable and secure than what he provided for me. The most devastating discovery was how meticulously David had planned for the possibility of exposure, how prepared he was for the moment when one of his wives discovered the existence of the other. Consultations with divorce attorneys, research into bigamy laws, strategies for protecting assets and minimizing legal exposure, all documented in emails and browser histories that revealed someone who had been anticipating this crisis for years. David wasn't just passively hoping his deception would remain hidden. He had been actively preparing for the moment when it would be revealed, developing contingency plans that prioritized his own protection over the well-being of either family he had been deceiving. The calculation and forethought involved in his preparation for discovery was more chilling than the original deception, suggesting a level of sociopathic planning that made me question everything I thought I knew about his character and motivations. Armed with comprehensive documentation of David's double life, I felt ready for the confrontation that would determine not just the future of our marriage, but the trajectory of my entire life. The evidence Maria had helped me compile was overwhelming and legally bulletproof. Photographs of his participation in his other family's daily life, financial records showing systematic deception spanning years, legal documents proving bigamous marriage, and fraudulent representation of his marital status. But I also knew that confronting someone capable of such elaborate and sustained deception would be dangerous, that David's response would be calculated to protect himself rather than acknowledge the harm he had caused or take responsibility for the crimes he had committed. Jennifer advised me to have legal representation present during the confrontation, to document everything that was said, and to be prepared for David to respond with threats, manipulation, or attempts to shift blame, rather than accept accountability for his actions. The confrontation took place in our living room on a Sunday evening in April, exactly 1 month after the photograph had arrived in my mailbox and destroyed my understanding of my own life. David was relaxed and casual, having just returned from what he claimed was a business dinner with potential clients, settling into his usual chair with the comfortable familiarity of someone who believed his secret was safe and his double life was sustainable indefinitely. I placed the photograph on the coffee table between us without saying anything, watching his face change as he recognized the image and understood that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. The transformation was immediate and complete. The casual confidence disappeared, replaced by the kind of trapped panic that appears when someone realizes that years of planning and deception have been exposed in a single moment. His first response was predictable: denial, followed by anger, followed by attempts to manipulate me into doubting what I was seeing. "I don't know where this came from, or what you think it proves, but you're obviously being manipulated by someone who wants to hurt our marriage." When I showed him the additional evidence Maria had helped me compile, the marriage certificate, the birth certificates, the financial records, the surveillance photographs, his strategy shifted to minimize and deflect. These people were clients who had become friends. The children belonged to Catherine, and he had simply helped her through difficult times. The legal documents were forgeries created by someone trying to destroy his reputation and our marriage. Each lie was more elaborate than the last. Each explanation required me to believe in increasingly complex conspiracies and coincidences. Each deflection asked me to doubt not just my own evidence, but my own perceptions and intelligence. But the moment that revealed David's true character wasn't his denial or his lies. It was his casual admission, when the evidence became impossible to dismiss, that he had been managing two relationships, because both women had different strengths and met different needs, as if his bigamy was a reasonable solution to normal marital challenges, rather than a criminal betrayal of two families who had trusted him with their hearts and futures. Catherine is great with the kids and makes me feel relaxed, but you're more ambitious and help me stay focused on my career goals. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, but I thought I could keep both families happy by giving each of you what you needed most. The breathtaking selfishness of this explanation, the complete absence of concern for the emotional damage he had caused or the legal violations he had committed, showed me exactly who I had been married to for 8 years. Someone who viewed other people as resources to be managed, rather than individuals deserving of honesty and respect. The most chilling aspect of David's response to being exposed wasn't his attempts to justify his behavior. It was his immediate transition to discussing logistics and damage control. His assumption that now that I knew about Catherine and the children, we could all work together to find a solution that would allow him to maintain relationships with both families without facing legal consequences for his crimes. He had clearly been preparing for this moment for years, had developed strategies for managing the crisis of discovery that prioritized his own comfort and security over the well-being of the women and children he had been systematically deceiving. His primary concern wasn't the pain he had caused or the trust he had violated. It was whether he could minimize the financial and legal consequences of his actions while continuing to have access to both families on terms that he found acceptable. The legal consultation that followed the confrontation confirmed what Jennifer and Maria had already explained. David's actions constituted multiple felonies, including bigamy, fraud, and tax evasion, crimes that carried significant prison sentences and would result in the complete destruction of his professional reputation and financial security. But more importantly, the systematic nature of his deception and the vulnerability of the children involved meant that my response to discovering his crimes would have consequences not just for our marriage, but for the innocent people who had been caught up in his web of lies through no fault of their own. Catherine and her children deserved to know the truth about their husband and father, but they also deserved to have that truth revealed in ways that protected them from unnecessary trauma and provided them with support and resources for dealing with the aftermath of discovering they had been living with a stranger wearing a familiar face. At this point in my story, I need to pause and ask you something that still keeps me awake at night, even 2 years after that confrontation in our living room. If you discovered that your spouse was not just having an affair but was living a completely parallel life with another family, maintaining 2 marriages and 2 sets of children while lying to everyone involved about the nature of their commitments, what would you do? Would you focus on protecting the innocent people involved, even if it meant your own justice was delayed or complicated? Would you prioritize exposing the deception immediately, regardless of the collateral damage to people who had done nothing wrong? Would you seek revenge that matched the scope of the betrayal? Or would you focus on healing and moving forward with your own life? I want to know what you would choose, because the decision I made affected not just my own future, but the lives of people I had never met, people whose only crime was trusting someone who had made trust into a weapon used against them. Tell me in the comments what you think is the right response when someone's betrayal creates victims beyond just yourself, when seeking justice means potentially causing harm to people who are already going to be devastated by the truth. The strategy I developed with Jennifer's help was designed to expose David's deception in ways that maximized accountability while providing support and protection for the innocent people whose lives would be destroyed by learning the truth about their husband and father. Rather than confronting Catherine directly, or allowing David to control how and when she learned about his other marriage, we decided to work through an intermediary who could provide professional counseling support while delivering the devastating news that her marriage was built on criminal deception. Maria's investigation had revealed that Catherine was completely unaware of my existence, that she believed her marriage to David was his first and only, that she had been planning their family's future based on the same assumptions of exclusivity and commitment that had governed my own understanding of our relationship. The revelation process began with a carefully planned meeting between Catherine and a family counselor, who specialized in helping people process traumatic discoveries about their intimate relationships. The counselor was provided with all the documentation of David's double life, the marriage certificates, the financial records, the surveillance photographs, and was prepared to help Catherine understand not just what had been done to her, but what resources and legal protections were available to help her navigate the aftermath of such systematic deception. The goal wasn't just to inform Catherine about David's crimes, but to ensure she had professional support for processing the emotional trauma of learning that her entire married life had been built on lies, that the man she had trusted with her heart and her children's future had been systematically betraying that trust from the very beginning. The meeting took place on a Thursday afternoon in May, while David believed he was safely managing both families without either knowing about the other, while he continued to present himself as a devoted husband to both of us and a committed father to all the children whose lives he had complicated with his selfish choices. Catherine's response to learning about my existence and our marriage was everything I had expected and feared: complete disbelief, followed by devastating recognition, followed by the kind of rage that comes from realizing you've been living in a carefully constructed fantasy while someone else controlled every aspect of your reality. The counselor reported that Catherine's primary concern, after the initial shock, was the impact this revelation would have on her children, who had never known any father other than David, and who would need to process not just their parents' divorce, but their father's criminal behavior and systematic deception. But Catherine's response to learning the truth about David's double life was more strategic and determined than I had anticipated. Rather than falling apart or retreating into denial, she immediately began planning her own investigation and legal response, determined to document the full extent of David's deception and to ensure that he faced appropriate consequences for the years of systematic fraud he had perpetrated against both families. Her background in accounting had given her skills that complemented Maria's investigative expertise, and her rage at being deceived had given her motivation that matched my own desire for justice and accountability. Within days of learning about my existence, Catherine had become my ally in exposing David's crimes, my partner in ensuring that someone who had treated two families as his personal convenience would face consequences severe enough to prevent him from victimizing anyone else in the future. The collaboration between Catherine and me was unprecedented and powerful in ways that neither of us had expected. Two women who had been competing for the same man without knowing the other existed, two families that had been unknowingly sharing the same husband and father, two lives that had been built on the same foundation of lies and deception, now working together to ensure that the truth was exposed completely and that justice was pursued comprehensively. Catherine's financial expertise revealed additional layers of David's deception that Maria's investigation had missed: offshore accounts, shell companies, investment vehicles that had been hiding assets from both families while funding his elaborate double life. My own knowledge of David's habits and psychology provided insights that helped Catherine understand patterns in his behavior that she had dismissed as quirks, rather than recognizing as evidence of systematic deception. The children's response to learning about their father's crimes was heartbreaking, but also inspiring in ways that reminded me why protecting them had to be the priority throughout this process. Catherine's son, who was 7 years old and had never questioned his father's occasional absences or mysterious business trips, initially refused to believe that David had another family, that his weekend trips to check on clients had actually been visits to spend time with another wife and help her manage household responsibilities he was simultaneously neglecting in his own home. But children are remarkably adaptable when they're provided with honest information and consistent support, and both of Catherine's children began to process the reality of their father's double life with the resilience that comes from knowing the adults around them are committed to truth-telling and protection rather than continued deception. The legal proceedings that followed the revelation moved with surprising speed once both wives were cooperating with prosecutors rather than trying to protect David from the consequences of his actions. Bigamy is a felony in our state, carrying prison sentences of up to 5 years, but the systematic nature of David's deception and the financial fraud he had committed to maintain his double life elevated the charges to include multiple counts of tax evasion, identity theft, and criminal fraud. The district attorney's office was particularly interested in the case because David's crimes had been so methodically planned and executed, because the evidence of his systematic deception was so comprehensive and well documented, and because the impact on the innocent victims, 2 wives and 3 children who had been systematically lied to for years, made this a case that would send a clear message about the consequences of such elaborate marital crimes. But the most satisfying aspect of the legal process wasn't David's eventual conviction and imprisonment. It was watching him realize that his carefully constructed world of deception had been completely dismantled by the very people he had been manipulating, that the women he had assumed were too trusting and naive to discover his secrets had become the architects of his exposure and accountability. His attempts to negotiate plea deals that would allow him to maintain relationships with both families were rejected by prosecutors who understood that someone capable of such systematic deception posed an ongoing threat to anyone who trusted him with intimate access to their lives. His efforts to minimize his crimes as relationship mistakes, rather than criminal fraud, were undermined by the comprehensive documentation of his deliberate and sustained pattern of deception spanning nearly a decade. David's parents and professional colleagues, who had known him as a successful businessman and devoted family man, struggled to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the evidence of his criminal behavior and systematic betrayal of everyone who had trusted him. The professional consequences were immediate and comprehensive. His consulting firm terminated his employment. His professional licenses were revoked. His business relationships were dissolved, and his reputation in the industry was permanently destroyed. But the personal consequences were even more severe. His children would grow up knowing that their father had chosen deception over honesty, selfishness over commitment, criminal behavior over ethical choices. The legacy he left them wasn't financial security or professional achievement. It was the knowledge that the person who should have been their most reliable source of love and support had instead been their most comprehensive betrayer. The financial recovery process was complex, but ultimately satisfying in ways that went beyond monetary compensation. David had been systematically draining resources from both households to maintain his elaborate deception, had been using marital assets to fund his double life, while both wives believed they were building shared financial futures with someone committed to their mutual prosperity. The legal process of recovering these diverted assets, of documenting the full extent of his financial fraud, of ensuring that both families received compensation for the resources that had been stolen from them, became a form of collaborative justice that strengthened the alliance between Catherine and me, rather than creating competition or resentment between us. The most unexpected outcome of this entire ordeal was the friendship that developed between Catherine and me, a bond forged by shared experience of systematic betrayal, but sustained by mutual respect and genuine affection for each other and each other's children. We had both been victims of the same criminal, had both been living parallel lives of deception without knowing it, had both discovered that our most intimate relationship was built on lies so elaborate that learning the truth required us to question everything we thought we knew about love, trust, and commitment. Our children, who were siblings whether their father acknowledged it or not, deserved to know each other and to understand that they were part of a family structure that had been complicated by adult deception, but that could be rebuilt on foundations of truth and mutual support. The healing process for all of us, Catherine, myself, and our children, was gradual but steady, supported by continued counseling and by the satisfaction of knowing that David was facing appropriate consequences for his crimes, rather than being allowed to continue his pattern of deception with new victims. The children's therapy focused on helping them understand that their father's choices reflected his character rather than their worth, that the love and support they needed could be provided by the adults around them who were committed to honesty and protection rather than deception and manipulation. Catherine and I learned to co-parent not just our own children, but each other's, creating an extended family structure that honored the biological relationships David had created, while refusing to allow his continued presence to threaten the emotional security we were building together. The community response to our story was overwhelmingly supportive, but it also revealed how common systematic marital deception really is. How many families are living with secrets and lies that threaten their emotional security and financial stability. The legal advocacy we began, working to strengthen penalties for bigamy and marital fraud, to improve resources for victims of systematic deception, to create better systems for detecting and preventing the kind of elaborate crimes David had committed, became a passion that gave meaning to the trauma we had experienced. Our story became a cautionary tale, but also an inspiration for other victims of marital deception, proof that even the most elaborate lies can be exposed, and that justice is possible even when the betrayal seems too comprehensive to overcome. The writing I began during the healing process, starting with a blog about our experience and expanding into a book about systematic marital deception and recovery, gave me a platform to reach other victims who might be dismissing their instincts the way I had dismissed mine for years. The response from readers was consistently the same: recognition that they too had been living with unexplained inconsistencies, accepting explanations that required them to doubt their own perceptions, making excuses for behavior that made them uncomfortable because they wanted to believe in the relationships they had invested in so completely. My story gave them permission to trust what they were seeing, to investigate what didn't make sense, to demand transparency from the people who claimed to love them, but who were treating that love as optional rather than foundational. 2 years after that photograph arrived in my mailbox and destroyed my understanding of my own life, I can say with certainty that discovering the truth, however devastating, was the greatest gift I could have given myself and my children. The anonymous sender who mailed me that family portrait, and I eventually learned it was David's sister, who had discovered his double life and couldn't stand to watch him continue deceiving both families, had provided me with the evidence I needed to escape from a relationship built entirely on lies, to protect my future from someone who had been systematically stealing it, to rebuild my life on foundations solid enough to support genuine love and lasting peace. Catherine's children and mine have formed the kind of sibling bonds that transcend the complicated circumstances of their creation, relationships built on shared experience and mutual support, rather than the deception that characterized their father's approach to family. They know the truth about David's crimes, understand why he can no longer be a consistent presence in their lives, but they also know that they have adults around them who are committed to honesty, protection, and the kind of love that doesn't require anyone to keep secrets or accept less than they deserve. The family structure we've created isn't traditional, but it's authentic in ways that our marriages to David never were. The legal reforms that have resulted from our advocacy work focus specifically on protecting families from systematic deception, on recognizing that bigamy and marital fraud aren't victimless crimes, but forms of emotional and financial abuse that can devastate multiple families simultaneously. Several states have strengthened penalties for marital fraud, created better systems for detecting bigamous marriages, and improved resources for victims of systematic deception. The photograph that destroyed my marriage may ultimately help protect other families from similar systematic betrayal, may help other victims recognize that they deserve relationships built on truth rather than performance, honesty rather than manipulation. The dating question comes up occasionally from well-meaning friends who think 2 years is enough time to move on and find someone new. But Catherine and I have both discovered that we're complete in ways we never were during our marriages to David, whole in ways that don't require romantic partnership to validate our worth or fill empty spaces in our lives. We've learned to trust our instincts completely, to value transparency above all other qualities, to prioritize our children's emotional well-being over any adult's desire for companionship. Any future relationships would need to enhance the peace we've built rather than threaten it, would need to demonstrate unwavering honesty rather than require constant surveillance, would need to understand that we come with extremely high standards for trustworthiness and character, earned through painful experience with someone who failed to meet even basic standards of decency and commitment. The most profound transformation isn't in our relationship status. It's in our relationship with truth itself. We no longer dismiss our own perceptions when they conflict with someone else's explanations. No longer make excuses for behavior that makes us uncomfortable. No longer prioritize other people's feelings over our own clarity and security. This shift has affected every relationship in our lives, from friendships that required us to accept disrespect to family dynamics that demanded we minimize our own needs to maintain false harmony. We've learned that saying no to relationships that diminish us is the same as saying yes to relationships that honor us, that protecting our peace is a form of self-love that models healthy boundaries for our children. Our children, now older and wiser from their experience with their father's systematic deception, have internalized lessons about truth and trust that will protect them throughout their lives. They know that healthy relationships are built on honesty and consistency, that love doesn't require keeping secrets or managing other people's emotions, that their perceptions and feelings are valid even when adults try to convince them otherwise. They've learned to ask direct questions when something doesn't make sense, to trust their instincts when someone's words don't match their actions, to value transparency over convenience in all their relationships. Most importantly, they've learned that the adults around them will always choose their well-being over any other adult's comfort, that truth-telling is rewarded even when it's difficult, that they never have to carry someone else's secrets to earn love or approval. If you've recognized elements of your own story and mine, if you've ever received information that made you question everything you thought you knew about your most intimate relationship, if you've ever realized that someone you trusted completely was living a parallel life you knew nothing about, I want you to know that the confusion and devastation you're feeling is temporary, but the strength you'll gain from choosing truth over comfort is permanent. Your children are watching how you respond to betrayal, learning from your example whether love means accepting deception or demanding honesty, the courage it takes to investigate what doesn't make sense, to trust your own perceptions over someone else's explanations, to protect your family even when the threat comes from within, is the same courage that will rebuild your life on foundations strong enough to support genuine love and lasting security. The subscribers to this channel know that systematic marital deception is more common than most people realize, that bigamy and parallel families exist in communities where neighbors and friends remain completely unaware of the crimes being committed, in houses that look perfectly normal from the outside. If my story helps you recognize patterns in your own life, if it gives you permission to trust your instincts or investigate what doesn't make sense, if it reminds you that you deserve relationships built on transparency rather than performance, honesty rather than manipulation, then please subscribe and share your own story in the comments. The healing that's possible after discovering systematic deception is profound and lasting, but it requires choosing reality over fantasy, protection over peace, truth over comfort. The anonymous photograph that arrived in my mailbox on that Tuesday afternoon in March wasn't just evidence of my husband's crimes. It was an invitation to reclaim my life, to escape from a relationship built on lies, to rebuild my family on foundations solid enough to support genuine love and authentic connection. The person who sent that photograph gave me the greatest gift possible, the truth about my own life, the information I needed to make informed decisions about my future, the evidence that would ultimately set both Catherine's family and mine free from someone who had been systematically stealing our lives while pretending to build them. 3 years later, when mail arrives at my address, I no longer feel the anxiety that characterized those months of investigation and legal proceedings. The mailbox that once delivered devastating revelations now brings birthday invitations from my children's friends, newsletters from organizations I support, correspondence from other survivors of systematic marital deception who have found hope and healing through sharing their stories. The difference isn't just in the content of the mail. It's in my relationship with truth itself, my confidence that I can handle whatever information comes my way, my trust in my own ability to distinguish between reality and performance, honesty and manipulation. If you want more stories about discovering hidden truths in relationships, about protecting families from systematic deception, about transforming betrayal into empowerment and justice, subscribe now and join a community of people who believe that love without honesty isn't really love at all. Your story matters, your instincts are valid, and your journey toward truth, however difficult, is worth taking. Because somewhere, another person is looking at their mail, wondering if the life they're living is real or performance, questioning whether the person they love most is someone they actually know at all. They need to know that anonymous photographs sometimes contain the most important truths, that family portraits can reveal family secrets, and that sometimes the most devastating discoveries are also the most liberating revelations. The family photograph that arrived by mail 3 years ago destroyed my marriage, exposed my husband's crimes, and ultimately saved my life and the lives of people I had never met, but who had been living the same lie I was living. That single image, mailed by someone brave enough to expose the truth, became the catalyst for justice, healing, and the kind of authentic family relationships that can only be built on foundations of honesty rather than deception. Sometimes the most important mail you'll ever receive comes without a return address, contains information that changes everything, and arrives exactly when you're ready to handle the truth it reveals, even when you didn't know you were waiting for that truth to set you free.